is our Saturday morning chameleon talk where we get together and we just talk about whatever's going on in the chameleon world. I am joined by Jonathan Hill. Jonathan, hello. How are things going?
Good. How are you doing, Bill?
Doing very well. I can hear you, and obviously you can hear me, so things are pretty good.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that is quite the cage you've got behind you.
Yeah, it's one of my newest enclosures that I got this past year.
All right, you know what? I'm gonna get a headphone on.
So
This will make audio so much better. Let's see. Hey, Leafless Eyes here. I believe that's.
hello.
Let's see. Can you say hello to me? Go ahead, Jonathan. Say hello. Just make sure my.
You can hear? Can you hear me?
Oh no.
No, you can't.
Well, I can hear you, just on the wrong thing. That's
Oh,
okay.
okay.
We are going to figure that out. All right, there we go.
Cool.
Fixed it. Leaf with eyes. I believe that is Gabriel. Gabriel, am I correct? I just want to make sure. See, Jonathan, I'm making it a point to figure out everybody's screen name and what the
Yeah.
real name is. Hey, Mikey's here. All
Hi,
right.
Mikey.
All right. So,
And a Facebook user.
yeah, anybody on Facebook, just remember, put your name in there just so we know who you are, because Facebook, for privacy, doesn't allow us to know who your name is. Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, they'll sell all of our information out the back door, but they won't let me know who's joined my live. Hey, John Courtney Smith is
John.
here. All right, Christine, welcome. Hey, Christine was on the premiere of the show. Did you catch our Chameleon Hour last night?
I didn't.
Well, it was a lot of you, so
Oh, okay.
you were
Cool.
already there. Hey, Paulette. All right. Yeah, we Chameleon King is here. Yeah, we the entire interview to play the video. It was part of the
Oh,
Chameleon
okay.
Hour, and
Oh,
of
okay.
course, the premiere just means that I'm there in the chat saying hello, everybody. But of course, it's available now for everybody to see. So
Oh,
you're
cool. I'll have to
you
check
are
one of those out.
you are now all over YouTube, Jonathan.
Uh-oh.
So,
Yeah.
hey, Two Turtle Tom. Hey, that's Tom Arbor. Did I Arbor? Is that the right last name? I know it's Tom, but so all right, Jonathan. How are things going in the baby nursery of yours?
Good. Yeah, we've got a full house. And I'll do a little spin so that people can see. The nursery
All right.
is right around this room here, and basically, I mean, I've got now 7 nursery racks, which is a lot compared to, I think, most people, and it's because of my goal to be able to raise everybody individually. And so I've been every year I'm investing in new racks, expanding the capacity to be able to house each of the animals the way that I've set out to from the beginning. So
Well, yeah, let's go over that. And I love asking you this question every time we talk, because I think it's just such a great example of your growth. You specifically are slowing your growth so your infrastructure can grow with your breeding,
project, yeah,
as
yep,
opposed to keeping back 10 females from your first clutch and then mating them all.
0 is how many I kept back from my first clutch. Yeah, no, I mean, and I from the very beginning after my first clutch, with my first clutch, I started with 2 rows on a rack, on a baker's rack, 16 cages, and it wasn't enough. And then I expanded to 2 racks. So I took one from like half a rack to 2 full racks. And that was enough for one female. and and people don't realize how much like investment that is. But that was when I only had one pair, and I was already seeing that, wow, to be able to do this, I have to invest in 2 racks to have enough for 32.
Mm-hmm.
And um, you know, or sorry, 24. It was 32, but I had I had one row of juvenile racks on top of a baby rack, so it was 32 total with 4 juveniles on top of that. But regardless, that type of slow growth where you're saying, okay, I've got one pair, you're trying to figure out what it takes for one female. That was my first goal. So the first year when I only had that single pair, I was trying to get an estimate for how many cages I needed to accommodate that female. And I went to 2 females and did the same thing. And so have slowly built up to where I am now, where I have my entire room in the basement lined with racks and cages, and I'm starting to think about space efficiency because of where I'm at. But yeah, that was the approach that I took, was to first figure out how much it takes to support one female, and then go to 2 and and build slowly, holding back a few animals, but very selectively picking the ones that were my favorites and kind of building on that.
All right, because uh you didn't just do the total 10 female plan, which is what people do.
Which is why
Uh
they burn out. They crash and they're not here anymore.
yeah. And so what are the advantages of building up slowly like you did?
Well, the big advantage is that not only does your infrastructure scale with your project, but your customer base scales with your project. People don't realize how hard it is. Like, the sales piece is really hard. So
Mhm.
from a business standpoint, if you don't want to be in a wholesale business, which I never did, um, then you got to build your customer base, and it takes time. You have to get people who have had good experiences to talk to other people. There's a lot of word of mouth type transactions, um, and that's why investing in the infrastructure, also investing in quality, slowly building up your customer base, it all works together really well, to create a successful project. Because what people get into trouble with is when you scale too fast and you have too many, either you can do wholesale deals, you start dropping the price like crazy just to move animals because you don't have enough space, you haven't built the infrastructure to handle what you're producing, um, and so you get pushed into corners. And I honestly don't think most people who are in that corner wanted to be there from the beginning. It was a mistake, and I'm not um, blaming them or judging them. I just am here to say that there's another way to do it. Um, and I think that the way that you can do it is you you basically you have to have a goal. So if you don't set boundaries for yourself, which is, then you're going to get into trouble really fast. So if you don't set boundaries on things like infrastructure requirements, single cages, double, maybe doubles. Maybe you have a double rule. Whatever your rule is, try to stick to it so that you slow yourself down when you hit that limit. Um, and that has been very helpful to me. And then also, like I said, there's a lot of positive externalities when it comes to customers, sales, and so forth, because that stuff doesn't scale fast either. So
Mhm.
you it takes time, and it takes a lot of effort to build relationships with people, learn about what they're interested in, find people that have similar interests to you, and then work together on your project, because it's a very informal market. It's not one where when you all of a sudden you have 100 animals for $1,000 each that they're all going to sell. That's not that doesn't happen. There isn't anybody like that. So it just, everybody puts in slow and kind of concerted effort towards what they have.
By the way, we have Dr. Mark Schertz is back from
Hey,
Tanzania and back
wow.
home in Denmark.
Hey, Mark.
And so I'm gonna, for those who are just starting to think about breeding, let me tell you what we see. I've been doing this for decades, and this is the
Oh my gosh.
pattern. People get excited about breeding chameleons, and they see how much panther chameleons are 300, 400,
Yeah.
$500,000. Oh my goodness, I can make this a living out of this.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's a lot. I mean, they just sit there on the calculator, and on the calculator, boy, riches are there. This is the problem, though. Number one, it's not as easy to sell the chameleons as it is to produce them.
Yes.
All you need to produce them is one female and one male. You have one clutch. You get excited. You hold back 10 females. You get another male. You mate them. And oh my goodness, I have 300 eggs in the incubator. And I keep using that number because that's like the magic number that I keep seeing people brag about.
So I
And
got
you
300 babies.
know, they are going to burn out because it takes, once those babies hatch, it's okay. You've got a moment of, this is wonderful. I am living in chameleon paradise. And then comes reality. Not all the babies get along. Yeah, okay. You can get away with the
Like, do
emotional
you have
stress.
300 cages? Because I don't know anybody who does.
Yeah, yeah. And then your babies start bullying each other. Well, now you got to separate them. You've got 300 babies. It's not going to be pretty. And then
No.
you find out, wait a minute, these things aren't selling. Why is it that camouflage, Frams cams, iPardalis, why can they sell all of these, but nobody's buying from me? Well, it's because you don't have the name. Oh my goodness. Now you have to be a business person, and you should have started marketing like 9 months ago and letting people know that you can be trusted as a breeder.
Yeah.
And and Robbie
Hey, Robbie.
Anderson.
Yeah.
Robbie knows exactly what we're talking about.
It's tough,
Robbie's in
man.
this too.
And
Oh.
I mean, I think people need to understand the perspective. Like on my first clutch, I had 13 animals, and it took me 6 months to sell them. That's 13. It took me 6 months to sell 13 animals. And I was raising them properly. I had the right equipment. They were not fighting each other. They had no injuries. They were flawless. And it took me that long to sell 13. When I went and had my second group, which was close to 30, I had females a year later. So that's the other
Mhm,
thing that you
mhm.
need to remember is the when you say you have 300 now, you're going to have 600 in 2 months. And then you're going to have 300 females next year.
Yeah,
That's
this
what you
is
need to think about is like it takes a long time to move them, and especially females, they stick around. Actually just sold, well, gave away for free so my last Jude Alla female from 2019,
mhm,
this
mhm.
like this month. So just people need to understand that it doesn't even for people that have the name or reputation or whatever it is, you just have to plan for long-term housing for your females. You have to remember that even if you can move your males, you're not going to be moving your females. That's just it, people are like, there's a lot of things that people don't think about when you're talking about scaling. So
Yeah, and the reason why I love asking Jonathan that question as to how he started is because he is the one who did it right the first time, did not have to go through that learning experience. I will admit, I had to go through that learning experience back when I did it in the 90s. I
well,
was that person with the calculator.
and I was the person listening to you, so
Well, good. I'm glad.
I didn't. It was not because of some genius. So I'll just make
Because
it straight.
and back in the 90s, it wasn't just okay, Panther chameleons. Oh, Daramensis and Mellorai and Quadricornis and Montium. And it was like, okay, so I have these 15 species that I'm going to be breeding. And yeah, it was uh, the worst thing that can happen to somebody doing that with the calculator is success, because you can be successful, especially with panther chameleons and veiled chameleons, because it's a recipe now to how to get babies. There's still skill in which ones to breed together. There's still skill in how to raise them, but getting them hatching out of the egg, that's enough to get you in a whole heap of trouble,
Yep.
because
Yep.
it's
But
horrible when things aren't going well.
yes, yeah. And I think, the challenges of breeding, besides the sales, the scaling, and everything else, is monitoring them for their health. Because just everybody who's had a chameleon knows how much goes into their care, and trying to see if there's subtle hints that something's off, and making adjustments, making improvements to get them back on track. That just scales to being like all the animals that are in your possession, the the same challenges except multiplied across however many you have. and
Mhm.
and that's the other thing that I think is a real um, challenge, and something that I've had to learn and grow with. One of my personal challenges was that I had started off with such success that I didn't have any illness. Like I just didn't have any illnesses to deal with for a couple years even. And most other people had tons of experience with all sorts of illness. And so that was something that I had to grow on. I think probably like year 3, year 4 was just recognizing illness and being able to address it, because it was new. It was something I hadn't experienced yet.
Here's something worth thinking about. Mark is saying, be interesting to see if there's a formula for figuring out what number of holdbacks makes sense based on clutch size and relative selling frequency of males and females. Let's talk about this.
That's a really good question. Um, I I personally try to make sure that I have 30 nursery enclosures per breeding female. That's a rough kind of uh, barrier to growth, and so then that kind of governs how many I can hold back. Is what size I have and how many females I plan to breed. Um, then the clutch size and selling frequency of males and females. I mean, if it, I yeah, you can. There's certain types that are more are rare and things like that. So you might, depending on your project, you might have different frequencies. But I just have yellow body, blue bar, envelope. I
Uh-huh.
don't have as much variation on that. I think other people might be able to speak to that a little bit more, Mark. My
Well,
frequency is pretty constant.
so let's also talk about the problem with panther chameleons.
Mm.
There's just so many that are wonderful, and so we think, okay, I've got panther chameleons, so I'm focused. But if you have ambanja, ambilobe, nosibe, sambava, those are 4 different chameleons. You're
Yep.
dealing with 4 different chameleon species.
And within each of them, there's the locale within the locale, like phenotypes of each. And most breeders, and many people find out, people want some certainty on their females,
Yeah,
what phenotype they are. So even if you have ambilobe, like I've scaled into, or I started to work on some red body blue bars for the first time this
yeah,
past year, and they're all ambilobe, but I'm never breeding those animals. They're treated like a separate locale. Um,
yeah.
and that's another level of complexity, because people will often think, oh, I've got 2 Mbanjas, I can breed them. And then when they go to the market, they realize like people don't want that combination of Mbanja, because one's a wild type and the other one's a blue one. And they're like, well, what is the female? I have no idea. It could be wild type, it could be blue. And you'll realize that the market for those is kind of close to a cross. Um, and
Okay.
that's a challenge too, because people don't realize it. They're like, oh, they're all from the same locale. From the market standpoint, they're not.
So what are you seeing as far as the market dynamics regarding locales? Are there things that are selling hot now? And
I mean, the blue and banja blurples is what I often refer to them as. There's a high demand for those. Um, there's there were for a long time. There's been a challenge producing red body blue bars, so those have gone for a little bit more. I personally am taking the opportunity to set my red body blue bars and yellows at the same price to stick it to the market, but that that's only personally because I love yellows and I'm insulted by the reds. So that, but yeah, there's definitely a demand for red body blue bar, blue and banja, and I think that there's a market developing for Mitsio. It's one of my favorite locales, and I see a lot of people starting some project with those, and I hope we have some success there. I hope the value goes up because one of the challenges I see with some of the rare locales, even though they're rare on the market, their price doesn't match it, and part of it I think is because there's not enough lines for people to
Mm,
work with, and so the females will drop to dirt cheap because you can't breed them with anything except for their brother or their father, and then the locale price doesn't sustain, um, even though it's rare, and it's kind of frustrating to watch because I would love to see, um, say like Mitsio take off, among other more rare locales, but for some reason the market value doesn't always match the rarity. Um,
so explain, what is it that makes a locale rare? It just seems like, and the reason I'm asking is like Mitsio, it seems like, okay, experienced breeders could get a hold of a bunch of Mitsio and establish it, but we don't see much beyond the standard Ambilobe, Ambanja, Nosibe, and Sambava.
and Sambava, yeah.
The
Yeah,
camouflage four.
yeah, the camouflage for well, I mean, there's something natural to the market. They've been doing it for 2 decades. They've had success for 2 decades. Um, and you can't I think that there's something just fundamental about it. When I remember when I looked at all the locales and I was getting into the hobby and I settled on Ambilobe because when I looked at all the other locales, they were cool, but Ambilobe has such variety.
Mhm,
Mbanja is very similar. Sambava is similar too. I mean, they all are kind of the rainbowish looks. They have basically every color, slightly different shades of each color, and I think the new customer tends to gravitate to those locales when they're doing their research. Um, some of the rare locales are ones that people like us appreciate because we've seen
mhm.
Ambilobe and Simbava and Mbanja everywhere, and we're kind of tired of it. So we see a rare one and we're like, wow, that's really cool. But the new customer generally doesn't have that perspective. They're learning everything for the first time, and they're going to gravitate to the big four, in my opinion. And so that just creates a market for those.
All right. So why is the Pink Panther not number 5?
Well, I honestly I don't think they're that nice, but
Okay.
I think I've seen some really nice Pink Panthers, Anchoremmies. Um, I think they're harder to breed, so I think they're more work. So if people have competing interests, those are going to fall by the wayside unless they really invest in it. And the resting colors aren't as nice. Um, they're really so as someone who loves yellow body blue bars, people like
Mhm.
to poo-poo their resting colors, and Anchorami is brown, like they look
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah.
So so when you compare when if people are gonna be complaining about a yellow body's resting colors, then like Anchorami is the far end of the spectrum as far as that problem is concerned.
Yeah,
Um,
for the
s-
people new to this, there is a Pink Panther. It's a very
yeah.
interesting locale because it's the only one that I've seen breeders say, Yeah, this one may be a little bit different. It's a little bit harder, and
Yeah.
uh, resting
Yeah.
colors are kind of, but when it fires up, it's just this
There's a pink,
gor-
which is cool.
gorgeous,
Yeah.
gorgeous pink. So
Very.
I, it just seems like that would be a great project, and for all the people working on the bright resting colors, that would be a good potential for that. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. It's like we need to we if we could get a line going that had better resting colors and get some diversity there, get some nice wild caughts and things. I've seen some people starting projects there and I like them. I think they're cool. I think they're in a similar boat to Mizio though, on the fact that they're rare and it's hard to get projects going without getting wild caught blood frequently. Um, so
well, and here's a question I'm going to ask. And a lot of times I ask questions because even though I know the answer just for the show, but this is a question that I actually truly am wondering is why is it so hard to establish like a Mizio or these others? Because and the reason, and I understand the dynamics you're saying. Well, they're not flashy like the ambulobe, but we have such a more, I would say right now we have more of a sophisticated market that
yep.
appreciates more of these like the nocifali and
Hmm.
the cap est. And so these are getting more attention.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
is there, why don't we see more of those?
I think that I mean I haven't worked with those locales, so
Yeah.
I'm not a
And
great
not that
person to answer
Jonathan
the
Hill
question.
has
Yeah.
all the answers in the world. We're just,
We were just postulating,
yeah.
but I mean I I I haven't worked with them. I've just observed other people attempt to work with them and have close friends and other breeders that I've talked to who have done it. And um, I just think that there's multiple things going on. One is the market, like we talked about. Two is the source of animals. One of the main reasons that I chose yellow body blue bar is because I could see it was very easy to find new lines and good lines.
Mhm.
Um, so that's one that's something that's very difficult. Even if you get a really nice sire, that's going to be a one generation project. You need 4, 5, 6, 8 quality sires from different lines. I now have I think 30. So the and it just at a certain point in your project you have a genetic bottleneck that you're going to reach, and with some of those locales you're going to reach it a lot sooner. You're more dependent on those imports, which I did import this year for the first time, or purchased some imports this year for the first time, and was successful in acclimating one of two males and one of two females. Um, but I mean, that's a pretty heartbreaking process for people. I think that it kind of wears on you if you had to do that every year. I wouldn't want to do it personally.
So, all right, let's go into, got a question here. The cages. So once you're starting to build
Cool.
infrastructure,
Hmm.
let's have an infrastructure conversation. And I know we talked about this in the interview, but
Yeah.
let's go ahead and talk about it in live. How do we start?
I personally would recommend starting with some sterile cages as your infrastructure, because so bio is great for babies. I did some bio bins and I had sterile racks. I've moved now to have some bio racks and sterile racks. But where you're going to start, what's easier to manage when you're just getting started with your first clutch, for example, sterile racks are going to be easier for you. Bio has a lot of advantages that I think is great to add, but I see it as it's an advanced thing. Because if you make a mistake with a sterile enclosure, it drains out, it evaporates,
Mhm.
it's gone. Like you're missing schedules off, it's not gonna hurt you as bad. In a bio, you can, if you're missing schedules off or other things, the parameters aren't quite right. The consequences are more severe. So if you get it dialed in and you get that habitat working very well, then I think there's a lot of benefits there. But that's why I think a lot of people have said that it's a more advanced technique, and I think that that's true. So if you are just starting out, um, it makes sense to get some sterile enclosures going and add some bio to it. Learn. Make sure you always have the sterile to fall back on. If you see some issue, you can get them out of there into your sterile infrastructure and fix the bio, because you don't want to be fixing a bio when you don't have anywhere else to put them. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that to me is why I think it's important to have a mix, number one, and make sure you start with sterile, just because the consequences for mistakes there are there's a little bit more wiggle room.
Yeah. All right. So I'm sure the big question is when somebody is having they have some eggs incubating right now. They're
Hmm.
saying, okay, what should I do as far as caging? And folks, your time to start planning for caging is when those eggs are laid, not
Yes.
when they hatch. And I tell you, as a cage manufacturer, I love all my customers, uh, but there is a lead time on things. And so when you like come and you order a nursery cage and say, well, my babies have hatched. Where is it?
Hmm.
When those eggs are laid, you know how many babies you're probably going to have. So
Yep.
that's the time to start planning. Uh,
Planning with Bill is like the Soviet Union, guys.
yeah,
Annual plans. Annual
that's right.
plans.
That's right.
That's
Uh,
no joke.
but
That was not meant as an insult. It's
no, no,
just
yeah, you're right.
it's true. You at the beginning of the year, you think about what you're gonna do with your project, and you buy it. You you build it. You get it ready. You don't try to time it with your eggs, because that's you're gonna end up in you're gonna end up missing it.
Eh,
So
I'm going to say when you buy a nursery system, and now there's more places that are going to offer nursery systems, but you're lucky if they're sitting there in stock when you need them on with a snap of the finger.
yeah.
But I can tell you the single most greatest point of enjoyment in having babies is when they thrive.
Yeah.
And you can sit back, you can enjoy your Jurassic Park. And the way to do that is once those eggs are laid, that's the time to invest in your infrastructure and start
Yep.
building out your cages, get the entire system set up and running before those babies even hatch.
Yep. Just like when you get a new chameleon, you get your enclosure set up and running before you purchase. And I mean, I think that the other thing people don't realize is there's a lot of things to do when they hatch, that if you're building cages at that time, you're just not going to sleep. So it takes a lot of time to just do the normal stuff when babies hatch. You don't want to be trying to add enclosures and everything else at that
Mm,
time. It's a lot of work. So
yeah. So what's your setup? Uh, what kind of setup do you, if you had babies right now,
hmm.
let's talk. I know you work with, you have Dragonstrand nursery cages, you work with Tumor Designs.
Yep.
Uh, and so,
And I have some leap now.
okay.
Um,
All right.
so I I like a variety. Um, I often will have a clutch half and half in slightly different conditions, um, just so that I can isolate anything that's going on. I can see, okay, this half's fine. Must it could be something about the enclosures over here or the setup over here, and so I purposely will vary the conditions of a clutch so that I can try to isolate what's going on if I see an issue. That's the first thing. This second, the I do start some in new bios. If I have a new bio, I love putting a new hatchling in there, because um then you're anybody who's managed a larger project knows when you're transitioning animals, you're sterilizing the environment, you're cleaning it out. So I like to have a fresh start. If I have a fresh start bio, then I love putting a hatchling in there. So I'll start some in I actually have some hatchlings in my leap bios right now. I've started hatchlings in Dragon Strand bios, the most recent version with a solid front, and I really like those. I've used those now, I think for 2 years, and I've had a lot of success with those. But I'd say about 60% of my nursery is sterile enclosures.
Okay.
So somewhere in that range. Once I go to juveniles and grow out enclosures, I'm almost 100% bioactive. And all of my adults, except for the ones right here, which I'm going to convert to bios, are in bios.
Okay.
So that's my housing strategy. And I don't know if there's something more specific about that, but that's yeah.
Yeah. And if anybody has questions about selling babies, caging, put it in the comments. This is going to be interactive here. And so Chameleon King is saying, if I'm not able to sell enough babies, would it be smart to sell at my local reptile shop or keep them until somebody wants them?
So Bill, you can probably chime in.
Yeah,
I double
you go
down.
first.
I double down. But that's me. I always double down. If I see that a clutch didn't sell well, then I expand my juvenile capacity, and I work to try to get those guys looking as best as I can. So give them ideal conditions, feed them well, gut load like crazy, and get some really good high quality photos of them, because in my experience, that's usually enough to get them to sell, but also sell at a high enough price that it makes the effort worth it. And I'm always thinking long term about capacity, and I'm like, well, that if I can get it to pay for my expansion, then I'm good, you know. Like, so
Mhm.
I'm also thinking that way. So for me, doubling down is always what I choose, and what I've chosen over the years is that sometimes it does make sense to do a wholesale deal. I find that I want to do it with somebody that I know and trust. So if you've seen the conditions at the local reptile shop and you're comfortable with what they're doing, then sure. I mean, there was a reptile shop that I've done a number of deals with where they paid great money for animals to stock their display enclosures, and then they sold the entire thing with the animal, and they were able to make a decent margin on it, while I could make a decent margin on mine. And I looked at what they were doing. They said, wow, those are great setups. They're setting people up for a great experience. And I would absolutely do that deal again. I think that was ideal. But to each person, you kind of know what you're doing, and you take a look at it and make sure it's something you're comfortable with. So
Yeah, and I'll come in and I'll say the thing you don't want as a breeder is pressure to sell. We are dealing with living animals that don't just sit on a warehouse shelf until they sell. And so you have to, if you want to get involved in breeding chameleons, you have to account for slow sales and have extra cages available. Your if you have to be ready to hold those babies, say for 6 months, and
at
uh,
least.
if you are planning, if you've got your eggs hatching, your next clutch hatching, or you don't have caging for chameleons that are bigger than a 3-month old, then you are going to run into a wall to where you are forced to compromise either on your price or on your husbandry. And I can tell
Yep.
you, you compromise on your husbandry, you're not going to be able to sell them. And it just is a
Exactly.
downward spiral.
Yeah.
Don't put
And
yourself in that situation.
And to Brian's point about how word of mouth is the best advertising, the word of mouth can also be the biggest threat to your project.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that when those animals leave you, they're in top condition, period. And I mean, I know from personal experience, I've been called out on Facebook when an animal that I sent out wasn't healthy. Um, and uh, you know, I think that that's also like the way that people handle that is um, is a challenge, because some people, they get mean. they
Oh, they
you know
definitely get mean.
they they're like, oh, you did it, and they don't take personal responsibility. And I honestly, that to me is frustrating too. Is, hey, own it. If something didn't go well, it's your animal, it's your responsibility. I always see it as, if my animals don't live to their full potential, doesn't matter who has them,
Mhm.
it's my responsibility, period. So the if someone even a year later is like, oh, there's this health issue that I've never been able to resolve, that's on me. um and um I that's always been my perspective, and I think that um this relates to how you scale, whether you have capacity, um and everything else, because you're going to have more of those situations if you don't have the infrastructure and if you don't scale at the right speed. So
Yeah, and I'm just gonna double down on infrastructure
yeah.
because the people who think that they're clever, think that they are so business savvy that they're going to be efficient by cutting back on their infrastructure and number of cages or type of cages or whatever, that is a short-term view that will blow up in your face. And these are people that are not in it for the long haul.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, I say there's really no way around putting money into building infrastructure for chameleons. They are not an easy animal to breed. And they I said it before, they're not designed for human convenience. They're not designed for us to be able to make money or have the experience we want. They are a miserable animal to breed. And so if you want to breed it, you have to be ready to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
And they don't like to be around each other. If you want to breed chameleons, congratulations. But the thing you want to breed has to be kept separately, or else you're compromising. And
Yeah.
and I
Yep.
know we have a whole history of keeping chameleons, raising them up together. We can get away with it. We've learned how to balance out that and make it
Yeah.
good enough.
Those animals might have lifelong eye issues from an injury or a nipped tail, or you know a V-shaped piece missing out of their spine. Um, you can see that stuff everywhere. You can see animals that have
Yeah.
been through that. Um, I prefer that we just don't put them through it. Um,
Yeah. The thing,
it's like,
and
just because they live doesn't mean it's good.
it's a transition that we as a community have to go through. And it's got to be on both sides, because
Yeah.
if the community doesn't care and won't reward people that do that, then the people who are standing up for the principle of doing it right there aren't going to be a lot of them. Because if you speak with your wallet,
Yeah.
and if you are buying from someone who bin raises their babies, and that price is the most important thing for you, then that is the best we will be able to have as a community. Because when Jonathan gets tired of individually raising babies and decides he's going to go and start his needlepoint hobby, uh, there's going to be no one to replace them, because they realize, okay, that doesn't work. So we as a community need to recognize what produces a quality chameleon, and we need to say it's worth it to support the people who do this. Oh,
Yep. Yeah, and I I honestly think that there's a natural market force that goes on, just like anything. The quality outcomes, people see it. They I can tell you, many people who receive animals from me are surprised about how big they are, how much color they have, all the other things that they've purchased 3 animals and they get one from me and they're like, wow, this one's a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be, because they've had experiences that are different. And I think if you want to be the person who who can give people that experience, it comes. This is how it happens. Is with that infrastructure. Um, I think I saw a, a mention of, we talked about phenotype, but are genotypes also known and recorded? That's an awesome question.
yeah. Well, I've got the
So
right guess because I wouldn't be able to answer that.
that is a great question. No, is the we don't know uh,
Actually,
all
Jonathan,
of us. So
could you step back and explain what this question is to the rest of us?
sure, sure. So phenotype is what you observe. It's the traits that you can see on the animals, what and those traits that are common are, you can classify as a phenotype. So, for example, in ambulobe, yellow body blue bar, you could argue is a phenotype. Um, you could say red body blue bar is another phenotype. You can see it, but the question is there a genotype that matches it, and what is the genotype? Um, and that starts to get into questions about trait inheritance and what produces the phenotype, whether it be like Mendelian traits with dominance, recessive, codominance, or um, polygenic traits, which is what most of us believe chameleon colors are produced by, is a polygenic trait inheritance. And obviously there's it's a lot more complex than that, because when you get into the organs that are producing it, um, there's certain organs in the skin, in the scales, different layers, um, and it's extremely complicated. um, it's a lot of fun if you like the science to get into that, um, but I would say that what we do know is that the genotype is not dominant trait inheritance. It's not, we don't know of any recessives, for example. So when people talk about things like a trait skipping generations on the sire side, it doesn't. So that's something that we know. And the reason is because the way that a trait would skip a generation on the sire side, that you can see the sire, is it would have to be a recessive trait that then pops up in the next generation when when it's combined with another recessive. And when it pops up, it would pop up at roughly a quarter. That's how recessive works. And it and what we actually see is what's called polygenic distribution of phenotypes, where you'll get some tail results in basically every breeding, and those are at the edge of the distribution, but most of the results are somewhere in the middle. And you don't see this pattern of skip generation 25%, skip generation 25%. We don't see that with any of these traits. So so we can pretty conclusively say that recessives are not playing a role in this. Um, the exception being pied, like the veileds, and a couple of species where we do see some recessive traits in chameleons, but in panthers, I'm not aware of any recessive traits. So that's kind of a long answer, but um, one thing that's really cool about the locale test is that the Rare Genetics Inc. has done, um, I think now over 20 full genetic sequences of panther chameleons, and they're using the full genotype to um, make sure that the accuracy of their test is improved. And I think that that's something, if you're interested in genetics, to definitely check out the writing around that, and even ask good questions and probe it, try to improve what they're doing, because I find it very interesting.
All right. This always is coming up when we talk about individually raising chameleons.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
everybody says, "Well, do I have to?" And it's a big conversation topic because most people don't. Most people keep babies together, and so and they seem to be able to grow them up and be successful. So let's talk about what is really needed as far as keeping them separate.
So as early as possible, they will benefit from being individually raised. I think the difference between that early 1 to 6 month range is that they can't physically hurt each other. So that's a
1 to
benefit.
6 month range.
Or
You mean
sorry, 6
6
week,
week?
week, week,
Okay.
week, week. My bad. Yeah, 6 months. No, 1 to 6 weeks. My bad. They can't physically hurt each other. They start to be able to physically hurt each other around 4 to 6 weeks old. Um, However, there's a lot of negative consequences and stunting and competition and so forth that occurs in that time frame. So even if they're not physically hurting each other, they're not going to grow at an optimal rate. And you could have animals that just don't make it because they've been in a group and they've been outcompeted, or in the case of a parasitic infection, you can end up with an unnaturally high rate of infection. We already have an unnaturally high rate of infection in captivity in most conditions, but when you put 2 or 3 animals, you take that and you exponentially multiply it. So however many you have, if you have 4 or 6, you're going to take it up by a power of 6, or a power of 4, or a power of 2. And if you know about exponential growth, like the any extra power on exponential growth is extremely impactful. So that, I think, is another thing people need to keep in mind, is like, even if they're not going to physically hurt each other, besides the stress, besides the competition, parasitic infection risk and other types of infections are going to just blow up in that small group, and it's not worth it.
So what are you seeing as far as the difference in growth rate? Because I gotta tell you, I got a 4-month-old Panther from Jonathan, and it easily could have been a 6-month-old. What's it got, 3 or 4-month-old? And it looked
Yes, three. It was three and a half.
yeah, and it looked like most people's 6-month-old.
Yeah, yeah. They grow. So they grow a lot faster. I would say right around that 6 week mark, because I've tracked it, and the animals that are in groups will just kind of flatline. Animals that are individually, they hit that exponential growth where they start doubling, and then by the time they're 3 months old, they're huge.
Mhm.
So they're doubling every week and a half, every 2 weeks from 6 weeks on. And so if they're in individual enclosures, they're going to hit that doubling stage and get big by 3 months old. Whereas if they're in groups, you might have one that doubles on you, and you call it the alpha, and
Mhm.
then the rest are flatlined, and they haven't hit that doubling phase yet. Um, and so they can actually be about half the size in some cases. I mean, it's a pretty substantial difference in size.
Okay. All right, folks, we are coming to the end of our Saturday morning hour. If you have any final questions or comments, go ahead and put them in the chat.
I have one thing for Brian. He said that pied isn't recessive because if you breed a pied to a normal, you can still get a pied, and that's actually a function of recessive traits. Um, because if the normal had just one pied trait, then you're still going to hit on it sometimes, even though you don't see it in the normal animal. So what you would have to do is take that normal animal and breed it. Well, you'd have to look at the ratio of the outcomes and try to dig in there to figure out if that normal was really a normal, whether they're holding the trait.
All right.
It's kind of
I'm
kind of
glad
like
I
in the
have
ball
you here.
python world, you have like 50% this and all that. So that's what happens when you have recessive traits.
So, all right. I think we're going to close it off here. We have a question about how do you incubate the eggs? That is a big topic. I would go to
4 minutes.
ChameleonAcademy.com and you go to the Panther Chameleon care summary, and you're going to see you're going to get some basic information like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you everyone for coming by. Jonathan, really appreciate you dropping by and sharing all of your insight and experience.
Thank you, Bill.
And everybody, I have an interview with Jonathan all about miniaturizing your care requirements and putting them into a small cage. And you can find it on YouTube. It's the Chameleon Hour. It was released yesterday, but of course it's up for you to watch whenever you want to. And just go to my channel, the Chameleon Academy channel, the one you're listening to right now on YouTube, and you will see that episode. It's a big long interview with Jonathan on things we didn't talk about today. So you guys got a double information here. So, all right, everybody. Yeah. Okay. There was a little bit of overlap.
There's a little content overlap. Yeah.
So
Small.
anyway. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you.